Hello, my name's Ajay and you're watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. Today it's truly an honour for us to welcome His Royal Highness the Crown Prince of Burma on the show. His Royal Highness came to England in 1961, initially for his education. However, 8 months later there was a military coup which ushered in the communist regime. Continuing his education, he gained a degree in mechanical engineering and later a master's in thermodynamics. Then he pursued a career as a consultant engineer and a financial analyst. Not stopping then, he went on to gain an MBA at Cranfield and later also another master's, this time in international relations, from the University of Kent. In 1993, he became the founder and the patron of the Royal Burma Society, which continues to support the more than 200,000 refugees who are now living in Thailand. Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for joining us on The Defining Moment.
Pleasure.
Well, today's topic is about power versus moral authority. And before we do get into that, can you please share with us a defining moment from your life?
Yes, I would say my defining moment in my life is when I went against the military regime that came into power in 1962. I think actually it's the 2nd of March 1962 they came into power. Now I need to explain to you a little bit about the historical background. Burma became independent on the 4th of January 1948. And we had a civilian government for 10 years. There were some problems with the so-called ethnic minorities, but they are actually insurgents. And the Prime Minister U Nu, who was a very close friend of my granduncle, handed the power over to General Ne Win, whose real name was Shwebomin. And I believe he was half Chinese and half Burmese. From a very humble background, he started as a post office clerk. So he ruled the country for about 18 months. And then there were general elections. And of course, UNU's party won again. Then we thought that it was going to be a democratic government. And then I left in the middle of 1961. And about 7 or 8 months later, the military coup took place. So after my first master's degree, which was an MSc in thermodynamics from Birmingham University, I was sent back to Burma. Now that year, interestingly, there was a Russian scientist called Kachenko, who was a physicist, and he was very happy working for a British institution. I believe it was the Rutherford Laboratory as a physicist, and he was bundled into a crate and flown back to the Soviet Union, and there was a terrible diplomatic row between the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom. So he was from Birmingham University too. He was my next door faculty. When my turn came to go back to Burma, I thought maybe I should not argue with the embassy people. So I let them chaperone me to the airport. I waved to them with a smile, and then I got on the plane, but they did not realize I had planned to jump plane at Frankfurt. So as soon as the aeroplane touched down at Frankfurt, I rushed to the airport and went to the train station and off to Zurich and then to Switzerland. And I just disappeared, and for about 3 months, and then sneaked back into Burma, into London. And so for me, my defining moment was to go against the power or that was not legitimate in my heart, and also I did not want to be part of the regime also to report to a general or an army officer who killed these students in 1962 when they seized power from the elected government of U Nu. And that man was known as the Butcher of Rangoon, and his name was Saint Luen. And he was notorious. He was the one who had the military police. And that was the reason, so I wasn't prepared to be part of it. So to me, that was my defining moment.
So from 1968, you just went underground for 20 years?
Underground for 20 years, yes. I just lived a normal life anonymously, partly very happy, or mostly very happy, I would say. I had a wonderful time, although there was a great sadness, which I did not discuss with anyone. There was much sadness,
obviously not being able to be with your family in
Absolutely.
your country.
There was always, sometimes I had bad dreams, nightmares, and it was a difficult period, but I tried to get over it by, meditation and try to tell myself that, nothing is going to last forever. There'll be good times to come. When the time comes, I must be ready to serve my people. So therefore, during those 20 years, I was gaining experience in terms of work and also gaining more qualifications. So now I'm ready to come out and tell the world, look, I love to do more for my people.
So you yourself were not prepared to be ruled under the force of power alone.
That's right. Yes, that's right. You're absolutely right. Now, so if I may explain to you why, because to me, power means the ability to make people do things against their will. Now, the power came out of the barrel of the gun, so not from the hearts and minds of the people. So because of that, the power was negative. I think technically all powers are negative by definition, because whoever has a power is able to force other people to go against their wishes. So therefore power is not legitimate in government. However, moral authority is. Of course, some people may be confused and the dividing line may be thin, but technically there is a very clear distinction. Moral authority is vested in those who are serving humanity. Now, if they are government, they have to serve the nation, the society, at the same time safeguarding the state. So there is such a thing as the concept of the state, which also can be good, which also can be bad. If the state power, the power of the state, when it is not legitimate power, that is, when it is not a legitimate moral authority, then things go bad and the people do suffer.
Now, can you explain what you mean by moral authority?
Moral authority is, your authority is justified because it has been vested in you by the people. They have appointed you, they have asked you to take that place. So in other words, individuals cannot make changes for the societies. They have to appoint someone or a group of people, basically a cabinet, the government. They will delegate the responsibility to the functionaries, like the civil servants, and through them all the activities take place. They could be social activities, they could be commercial activities, economic activities, educational, cultural, whatever they are. This is for the good of the people. And therefore, that is not for the people in power. That is not for their benefit. The people who have been given the moral authority, they are doing a job for the people, but not for their own benefit. And of course, people appreciate that they have to be looked after, so therefore they are paid their salaries, and they have got good pensions. Fair enough, there's nothing wrong with that.
And in what way would you consider that royalty, obviously being of royalty yourself, do royalty have a moral authority as opposed to, let's say, a political regime or a military regime?
Oh, of course, the royalty, historically, why were kings created? Because people always needed someone to guide them. And that is not by force. I mean, some people who are bad, once they have the moral authority, they turn it into power. That is wrong. But if they do that, people have a choice. They can quite openly get rid of a king, and they can appoint someone else, as his successors to the throne. There's nothing wrong with that, because statistically speaking, of course, if the bloodline continues, because they believe that genetically that is a good person, good family, good upbringing, that is the case. Of course, there are people who actually broke the rule and they did not keep up with the traditions of the royalty, but the royalties keep coming back. It's not the end of the royalty. Even in a lot of countries which are believed to be Republican, you never know, because life goes on forever. So they could come back.
Now, actually in line with what you've just said, as I understand it, in Burma, the tradition is a Buddhist one, the culture.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, is there a concept similar to the English tradition of the divine rule of kings? Is there something similar in terms of the moral authority comes from a divine source rather than just, it's a good family?
In the Buddhist kingship, no king can assume himself to be higher than even the Sangha, that is the monks. Because the king is the patron of Buddhist doctrine. Of course, the king will support the monks, but he doesn't place himself as a head of the church. It is not his business. Actually, he is the protector of the Sangha. Sangha means a collective, the monkhood. So all the religious leaders, abbots, they could even watch over the king and to make sure the king doesn't, break the rules of good kingship. And if he does, the abbots have the right to intercede and even tell the people we don't have a good king, and the people can take action against the king.
So if you were in your monarchy right now in Burma on the throne, you would still be accountable to the priesthood or the monarchy?
Absolutely, because I was brought up as a Buddhist boy, and I went to the Buddhist monastery. I would pay homage to the monks, and I myself was a Buddhist monk for 22 days. And this is the initiation. It's like the baptism in Christianity. So every boy, a Buddhist boy, has to be a monk for a time. So I was a monk before I left Burma, just to make sure that I left as a proper Buddhist boy.
Okay, now just moving on from, I guess, that topic in terms of the moral authority and where does that really come from. Let's just go back to power itself. I mean, power, of course, is often associated with something negative, like it's just an oppression. However, you do need to have some kind of
certainly,
kind of authority. Now, where
sure.
do you think that, in terms of like the management of a country, or in your case, taking the responsibility for a nation, how do you go about that?
Well, I think one should not use force, because a force is actually irrational. Because in the long run, I think if you change things using force, what will happen is that the victims will wait for the opportunity to use the force against you. So what I mean, that is very unstable. It's better to have a tradition of moral authority. It's better to have a system that safeguards the moral authority, the people who are elected to have moral authority. So on a long-term basis, of course, the monarch, the king, is the overseer of that process. So the king can be a king all his life, but he will not assume the absolute power, like life and death of the people. That is not the right thing. He will always consult his minister. He will have his council. They have a debating chamber. With the Burmese system, the king has got the left-hand side, right-hand side, the minister. They would debate. And the king will look at it like a judge. So then he will say, okay, I'll look at your argument. I'll listen to your argument. I think, on balance, the right thing to do is such and such, which is very much like being a judge. But why is it so in this country, United Kingdom? Who do they report to? Actually, they are Her Majesty courts of justice, not the executive government, is it? So that also come in with the concept of the separation of the powers, the executive, judiciary, and the legislature. So these three have to be separate. Of course, all three circles will have an overlapping area, which is the monarch. Now that is what is missing in Burma. So once we have that, we will have a system with moral authority, and the people who do not conform or do not comply with the requirements of their responsibility can be thrown out of office. That's how it should be.
Your Royal Highness, I know that Burma, like many parts of the world, has a colonial past. Now, can you tell us about that? And also, in your reflection, do you think that that in itself was an example of power or moral authority?
Oh, it's definitely power. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I study in international relations. One of the subjects is international political economy, and of course economics as well. And Karl Marx wasn't right in everything, but he was right in saying that at the extremity, capitalism could lead to imperialism. But what happened was that the British Empire basically was actually to extract the resources from the colonies. So they were not justifying their action to the native people. They just did whatever they like. And of course, all in all, the whole of Burma was under colonialism, under the colonial rule, only about 2 generations, only about 62, 63 years, not very long. But all the time, the Burmese were fighting. The Burmese wanted our own king. And in 1937, there was a movement, our own king amongst us. So that means in Burmese called Ko Min Ko Chin. Ko Min is our own king, Ko Chin amongst us. So that idea was mooted. But at that time, the Queen Superior Lut, the wife of King Thibaw, who was exiled to India, Ratnagiri. He died there. But the queen went back to Burma, and because of her, the idea of monarchy wasn't revived. So Burmese people were not allowed to study the Burmese history from the Burmese perspective. And the British did not really teach the Burmese history to the Burmese people. The school's curriculum did not include Burmese history. The worst thing was that when the British took over, they seized the Mandalay Royal Palace. Actually, they burned the royal archives. The Burmese king, throughout centuries, have kept up meticulously all the genealogy. Now, the reason was this: if you destroy a country's history, you can destroy the people's spirit. They can break your spirit. But the spirit wasn't broken, but Burmese people know what has happened. The only problem was, in my case, ever since I came out in 1988, there were people on the internet, some Americans, saying that I'm a pony, whatever, fake, whatever. They wrote about these things. But I don't take any notice of that because I know the truth. So, to answer your question, the colonialism never was moral authority. Whatever they say, there was no moral authority. In fact, colonialism retarded the growth, the evolution of the democratic moral government system.
Is that the distinction between power and moral authority?
Yeah.
The very fact that when it comes to power alone,
Yeah.
there is very much a self-interest.
Absolutely, absolutely. The people in power, they want to perpetuate power so that they can feather their own nest. And what is so curious is that even in democracy, once people get into power, they stop becoming Democrats. And they try to do whatever they can to perpetuate their power. Now, the paradox of democracy is this: Hitler came into power through democratic means. Then he was a dictator. Now, how do you explain that? Unless there are checks and balances on the person who has been elected, the person will turn himself into a dictator. And there is no longer democracy.
Now, obviously, having done an MBA, I'm sure you're familiar with case studies. So perhaps we can look at other nations and see what we can learn. Can I start with Nepal? What do you think are the lessons to learn from what's happened to the royal family there?
Well, it saddens me greatly to learn what happened to the royal family, and it is very tragic. But unfortunately, Nepal has a bigger problem than Burma. It is a small country and is even, I believe, poorer than Burma. And the problem with Nepal is that they have a very strong Maoist movement. They are very much entrenched ideologically. Now, how do you bridge the gap between that and monarchy is quite difficult. What I know from the newspaper and the media generally is that the king took a very strong action against these people. Maybe that is not the wisest thing. Perhaps the king could invite these people to have a dialogue and maybe modify his position, not give up everything he has, but still make a deal with them that, okay, I like your, ideals, in other words, equality, opportunities, but on the other hand, freedom of expression and the single-party rule is not quite right. What about having a legitimate political party for your people and then go to the ballot box and whoever wins the election can be the government? So just usher in democratic process in consultation with the Maoists.
Do you think there are some lessons there for you, particularly in your position right now, being in exile?
Yes, I will not take sort of a sledgehammer approach. I will not crush anyone. I would talk to everyone. I would try to get the consensus. That would be my approach. This is why when I was persuaded to condemn the present Burmese military regime, I said, no, a king never condemns his army. A king never condemns his political party either, because they are all part of the Burmese populace, and they are my people. So what I will do is, I will try to persuade them to become gentler, to be more caring and loving, and which they believe they are doing. Now, the problem is that this goes back to the colonial era as well, because we don't have party traditions in Burma. But you do need two, at least, strong parties so that there is no one-party state. If you look at the East Germany, which has been, united with West Germany, they used to call themselves the German Democratic Republic, whereas West Germany was called German Federal Republic. Isn't it interesting that communist East Germany call themselves democratic? It's just so incredible that their own perception of democracy, one-party state with no opposition, and the country is supposed to be democratic. And I think what is happening in Nepal is probably the Maoist, the Communist Party there, they always believe in their own ways that theirs is the true path to democracy. But that is pure power democracy. It is not a moral authority democracy.
Interesting. And you did mention, of course, East Germany and the fact that they think of themselves as a democracy, or they did think of themselves as a democracy. And that's a parallel just to North Korea, where, again, you have a communist regime, but
that's right.
They call themselves a democratic
That's
state.
right, in North Korea. This is so funny that, it's a one-party state, and the son handed over the power to the father when he went. What happens to the son? They're most like behaving like the kings in a way. On the one hand, they are Republicans, they don't recognize monarchy, but once they get into power, they just try to emulate the kings without the understanding of the moral kingship, the philosophical side of kingship. A king has to be, strictly speaking, a philosopher.
Now, isn't that just a paradox, the fact that communism itself wants to deny, let's say, the divine rule of not only kings, but the divine rule of God himself, but nevertheless, when they go into power, they become a god.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's quite sad, because it basically is political stagnation. And of course, if you look at other countries, I think the closest to us actually is Thailand. But funny thing was, after 1988 military coup on the military communist regime, I knew straight away that there was a sea change. So I wrote letters to Burma, and an old Etonian took 150 letters to Burma. He posted from within Burma that reached the ministers and the religious leaders and the generals who were ruling at that time, headed by General Shwebomin. General Shwebomin mentioned that what our country needs is like a monarch like Thailand, Japan, and Great Britain. And he had me in mind. And one American newspaper rubbished him, saying that he wanted to say thank you to his daddy, the Shwebomin, the General Ne Win, who staged the military coup in 1962. It wasn't the case. I knew that man himself was under house arrest. But here, some of the colonialists said that he was still ruling, pulling the string from behind. It wasn't the case. When he died, there was no state funeral. There was no representation from the army at all. The army did not want to know him because he ruined the country. So the present situation is the army is trying to modernize the economy. I told them to open the country, liberalize the economy, and they did. But the problem is, when you liberalize the economy, liberalize the markets, you do have to regulate them. You do need laws. What happens is, when you give total freedom, then comes the dictatorship within the economy, and the market economy also create monopolies. And they're linked with the military, so it doesn't actually solve the problem. So you really need a central authority that can control the market, that can regulate the markets for the good of all, for the good of the collective, the whole nation. So not for the benefit of a few. I mean, look, for example, the Russian Federation. Communism is gone. Immediately, what do you get? You got the oligarchs. Quite interesting, isn't it? Suddenly people became very rich. But the poor Russians are still poor. It is sad. So they have to evolve. Nevertheless, the fact that they got rid of communism is good. They have some semblance of democracy. It's not perfect democracy. Where do you have perfect democracy? I can't think of any country where democracy is perfect.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you, is there a nation where you feel there is the right balance between power and moral authority?
I don't think so, because what happened is that the tendency tends to be in favor of power in a lot of countries. The country, to me, which is very close to moral authority is Switzerland. That the rule is by moral authority is Switzerland, the cantonal system. And for various reasons, they seem to be a very successful country, and democratic country, and a humane country. Because it's a small country, sometimes it's a lot easier. And they can manage it. Also, they have advanced technology. And in fact, the rural countries, like big country like Burma, if the Western model of democracy doesn't fit well, we should go back to traditional monarchy, a monarchical democracy. Another monarch as a titular head of state without executive power, but keeping an eye on the executive, that means government. So the government is answerable to the monarch, and the monarch is answerable to his subjects, to his people, because that is his primary duty, to look after his people. So in other words, there's a circular relationship.
But then what happens, as you said, like in communist regimes, if your monarch becomes an egotistical maniac who just wants to take power?
You don't have a monarch. What you have is a dictator who has a pretension of monarch. That's what it is. They have the pretension without understanding the real meaning of monarchy.
And what would be the right course of action in that situation?
The right course of action is education. In fact, even educating people from the top, starting with the top. Because if they have not absorbed it in their hearts, in their minds, they are not going to change. So what happens is that they are comfortable with their material trappings, because power means they are able to tell people to do things against their will, and they can do whatever they like to the people. They can put people in prison, and they have no recourse. So they are quite happy because they do what they like. But that can't go on forever. Because if they go on, what will happen is the country will stagnate. When the country stagnates, they become weak economically, and they could buy missiles and nuclear weapons, but that is not going to protect the people. The country will fall. In fact, the state could fail if they do that. The strength of the state depends very much upon the people. The people are more developed, more democratic, more caring. They take responsibility for each other. Then that will be a strong state, because there is cohesion. Cohesion is very, very important. Once a country is cohesive, it will be difficult for the external powers to interfere. External powers can interfere when the country has no harmony, no cohesion. People are selfish. And when the leaders are selfish, when the foreign invaders come, do you think the people will defend them? No way. So what happens? They become divided, and they become slave states.
And finally, Your Royal Highness, if hypothetically you were to be able to come back out of exile and take up your leadership role on the throne back in Burma, if that was to happen, let's say tomorrow, in order to establish, let's say, this monarchical democracy, what would be the first thing you would do?
Oh, I would like to invite the generals and the politicians and all the community leaders together to thank them for bringing me back. And I would say, we are now in a new era. Now let us work. Let us create a system where there is justice, where there is harmony, there is peace, and there's a caring society. And for the good of everyone, we look after the elderly, we look after the children, because the Buddhist tradition is so easy, because we don't resort to violence. When did you ever hear about assassination attempts in Burma? No. When did you ever hear about people throwing bombs in Burma? No. In spite of all the repression, I think my people have followed the correct path by not resorting to violence, and that is correct. So I'm very proud of my people.
Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for joining us on The Defining Moment.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
You've been watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. If you'd like to find out more, we're on the web at www.definingmoment.eu. Thank you for watching, and we wish you all the best.